Good afternoon. I'm calling the May regular meeting of the Groton Complete Streets Advisory Committee to order. Let's start with a roll call.
Granatowski.
Tom Olson, member.
Brian Kent, Chair.
Lori Hendrickson, member.
Cindy Berry, Ledgelight Health District.
Thank you. Are there any communications to the committee? No.
No.
Okay. Approval of minutes.
I've presided, offer that we have the minutes in the agenda and move that we accept them as presented.
Second.
Second. Any discussion of that?
Yeah, Brian, under committee members, Barry is incorrect. It should be Barry, B-A-R-R-Y.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes? Say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, minutes approved. All right, let's get right into new business. The first item on the agenda is discussion with Fitzgerald Halliday Studio, the town's consultant for the Complete Streets Study. Is FHI ready for their presentation? They're knocking on the door.
Is this where we're going to be going through the packet that was included in the agenda?
Yes.
Hi, everyone.
That's part of it, plus their presentation. It's
And
more of a comprehensive.
Lori, can you go ahead and share the screen, being that you have the presentation up? Just run it for me. All right, and I take it you can all see our presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Thanks again for making some time for this discussion. What we'd like to do is update you on where we're at with the Complete Streets and Trails planning process. So our agenda is to review some of the data that we've collected to date, both from our existing conditions analysis, and we'll talk briefly about the outcomes of our workshop with you and some of the other attendees last month. We'll talk about the online survey, which has been online for a couple of weeks now, and what the status of that is. And then I think more importantly, we want to talk about the focus group meetings that we are scoped to do, and talk about scheduling the workshop. We are scheduled to do a community-wide public workshop open to the public. So I'd like to close out our discussion with that. So if we advance to the next slide. We've conducted a decent amount of analysis of your roadways, and that starts with, on the next slide, basic classification of the roadways. So we've done quite a bit of mapping with respect to what types of roadways you have in the various roadway conditions. So those would be the functional class, whether those are arterial, collector, or local roadways. And we walked through much of this information with you at the workshop last month. But we also took a look at, and if we go to the next slide, traffic that you have on those roadways. And traffic can be a huge factor in bicycle facility planning, and to a lesser extent in pedestrian facility planning. But it's very often one of the factors, one of the metrics that we look at when we take a look at the feasibility or suitability of a corridor to accommodate bicycles, and potentially what type of facility would be required to comfortably and safely accommodate bicyclists. So what we see is that you have a range of traffic volumes in town. Fortunately, while you do have some state roadways that do carry some relatively high traffic volumes, you know, up above 15,000 vehicles per day, which is a lot of cars. You don't have very many very high volume roadways. And here the darker colors, the red colors are very high volume, 20,000 or more vehicles a day. So that's really just Post Road where it meets I-95. In other areas, our volumes are more manageable from the perspective of considering the accommodation of bikes on those roads or adjacent to those roads. So that's all good news, and we have that all mapped now. If we go to the next slide, we do have some traffic speed data, and speed is another important factor when planning bicycle facilities and both the safety and comfort of those facilities. And what we see here is the speeds are on the higher end. So while the traffic volume is relatively moderate on many corridors, the speeds are on the higher end. And sometimes there's a direct correlation between the two. Where you have a lower volume roadway, the speeds are higher because there's less traffic to constrict or restrict speeds. So you have many roads that are above where the 85th percentile speed. And real quick, basic lesson on 85th percentile speed. That's the speed at which 85% of traffic is traveling at or below. So it's intended to eliminate any particular outliers of people that are speeding or scofflaws. And it's intended to paint the picture of the average traffic flow or the most typical traffic flow on a corridor. So your 85th percentile speeds are at or below 40 miles per hour on many corridors. And as a cyclist sharing a road with traffic of that speed, it's not a very comfortable experience, and it reduces safety. So we have to carefully, in addition to traffic volume and the characteristics of the roadway, we need to consider traffic speed when planning complete streets, bicycle and pedestrian facilities. So we have, fortunately, very good coverage across the town. We don't have every road, but we have a lot of the main corridors that we have speed data for. So that's a very good basis for us to do our work. All right, next slide. We took a look at the crash safety data. And of course, wherever you have traffic volume and intersections, you're going to have crashes. And so what we see here is where the crashes are occurring. These, what we have on the map, are hot spots of all crashes. The heat map, the red dots, red and yellow, indicate higher frequency, green, lower frequency crashes. And what we see here is, of course, I-95, but let's subtract that out of the mix because that's not part of our study area or scope. But your local roadways, your state highways, whether it's Route 1 or some of the other state roadways, that's where your crashes are occurring. They're crashing, those crashes are occurring mostly at intersections. So it's a fairly predictable pattern. At this stage in the planning, it doesn't discourage us from considering any of these corridors for bicycle facilities. And in fact, in many cases, you can make an argument that where you have a corridor that has a higher degree of crashes, it's really an argument for a separated bicycle facility or some sort of pathway to accommodate bike traffic. And particularly, it's an argument for getting pedestrians off the roadway, away from some of those traffic conflicts. This is something we'll continue to look at, and we'll look at closer as we start to consider recommended facilities and various intersection treatments to accommodate those facilities. We'll be taking a much closer look at what types of crashes are occurring so that we can improve safety along with expanding mobility for all users. All right. If we go to the next map is a composite map that we made of those various conditions, whether it's traffic volume, speed, or crashes. And so what we see here is when you combine those different factors, it adds to the level of stress on any particular corridor. And the more volume you have, the higher the speed, the greater the incidence of crashes, the higher stress environment that will be. And at which point, you know, if we want to accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists, we want to make sure that in addition to being safe, which is the #1 priority, that they are also comfortable, because if they're not comfortable, they won't feel safe. And if they're not comfortable, they'll be less likely to bike or walk or use the facilities that are built for them. So comfort and level of stress is an important consideration. And in this map, it just guides us in that effort. Okay, now if we go on to the next slide, and this just expands upon that work with other factors. So here we actually map out the stress. The prior slide was the factors that contribute to the stress. This is mapping it out. So the green would be lower stress corridors, the red higher stress, et cetera. On to the next slide. We also have taken a look at where people are riding bicycles. And this is just for biking. We could pull one down for running as well. This is Strava-based data. So Strava is an app that a lot of people have for their phones or watches. And it requires the user to basically log their trip or their run or bike or whatever it may be and record it. So it's driven by recreation. It's a recreation-based app for recording your workouts. Fortunately, Strava, they have that one side of their business consumer focused with the app. The other side of it is actually selling the data, which I think, as we understand, most of these tech companies make a living by selling our data. And we have a subscription to that data. So we pulled down the Strava bicycle data for Groton. And we have some maps that show exactly where people are recreationally riding their bikes and logging those trips. So the heavier, the darker the line weight, the more trips there are. And of course, we can zoom in, get a little more detail on this. But we have a very good idea of where people recreationally are riding, and it is on many of your major roads, even roads that you would expect people would not want to bicycle on. They are riding long trips on, or even short trips in some cases. And then, of course, your trails. People are trail riding, mountain bike riding on smooth trails or on really technical mountain bike trails, and we have all of that. So we know where people are in some cases driving their bikes to, putting it on the bike rack and the back of their car, driving to a trailhead location or a park, open space, riding around. And then many other cases where people from right out their back door are riding to either to get somewhere or just getting some exercise. So this is a piece of information that will help us quite a bit in our work. We did reach out to SCCOG. And so that's the northern half of Groton. Here's the southern.
Hey, Francisco, this is Brian. I have a question about the Strava data.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is an option for a Strava user to characterize their ride as a commute. Do you have access to that level data?
Not on the surface. I would have to, admittedly, I'm not the one that pulls this data down. And I think that may or may not require like a really premium level of subscription. I think we just have like the entry level subscription. So I'm happy to look into that as to whether or not we can get some metadata for these trips. Right now, I definitely know that we can know where the routes are and what volume of traffic there are in those routes. As to whether or not we can get some metadata on that, I would have to look into. Okay. With respect to understanding trips a little more on bike and pedestrian activity, we did reach out to SCCOG. Just see if there's any counts done that are regionally available. I think there are very, very limited data for one or two trails in town. So Nicole from my team has been working on that. I don't think we have anything ready to share with you, but point being, there isn't much that's available to us by way of that. All right, so I talked earlier about traffic safety and crashes. If we go to the next slide, we did, fortunately, this is an excellent data set that we get from the Connecticut Crash Data Repository, which really does have tremendous amount of metadata. And you can really understand what is going on with the crashes, what the contributing factors are, whether or not it was a bike ped related, time of day. It's an incredible resource of information. And so we pulled the bicycle and pedestrian crashes for that over a 5-year period. And this is as recent as the end of 2023. And so what we have a bunch of pinpoint locations. So we see a consistent amount of crash activity primarily along Route 1, and some other locations scattered, but there's what you could almost call a pattern, which can be very difficult to establish sometimes with bike and pedestrian crashes. They tend to be, fortunately, there aren't many of them. They tend to be one-off occurrences. We don't often see patterns, but here there's definitely a pattern being exhibited along Route 1 in those little triangles and circles that we have shown there. And the circles are bikes and triangles are pedestrian-related crashes. So we'll want to take a much closer look at that as we consider facilities for Route 1. Okay. All right. We've also done an origins and destinations analysis. And this analysis is really intended to show us where we expect most of the trips to be originating from or arriving at. And these are both bicycle and pedestrian trips. And so this is analysis we conduct ourselves. It's a GIS tabletop analysis. We first map locations that we expect would generate those trips or be a destination for people arriving on bike or foot. And that starts with your K through 12 schools, any universities, parks and playground, community centers like libraries, town halls, senior centers, major employment locations, areas of high population density, retail corridors. So we map all of that. We assign a weight to each one of those pinpoints on the map, and then they exert an influence, and there's an algorithm or a script we run this through in GIS, and it produces a heat map. And so what we see is that we expect most of that activity to be generated, those trips to arrive at or be generated from locations along Route 1, mostly south of I-95, on the western corner of town, to a lesser extent on the Mystic side of town, and much lower densities of trips generated north of I-95. So one of the values of this is, first of all, it's an argument for and a rationalization for doing a much better job of accommodating bicyclists and pedestrians in these areas. But it can also help us prioritize improvements, determine where our facilities should be more dense or more robust, and maybe where you start as you start to consider designing and building facilities or pursuing grant applications. This is information that could support you in an application and guide you towards the areas where we expect you to get the most benefit that would accommodate the most amount of users and the most trips.
Francisco, we've got a
Yes, sir.
question.
Yeah,
Patrice has a
absolutely.
question for you.
Hi,
please.
it's Granatowski. A question about the map that's in front of us right now. Is
Yes.
this based on historical data or is this speculative?
I would call it a speculative. So these aren't actual trips. This is modeling that we've done, and it's pinpointing all of these locations that we expect would generate a bike or pedestrian trip or be more likely to. And then we model what we expect where the highest density of trips would be. So it's a model, and it's somewhat like, I guess you could say it's predictive, except this is true right now in this moment. We're not painting the picture of a future scenario. This is these are the locations where we think you have the highest activity of bike and ped trips or demand. It's not always associated with actual activity because there may not be any facilities to support bicycle and pedestrian trips in these areas. But we think this is the area of the highest demand, and that could be a latent demand if there are no facilities there right now. Okay. All right. So our next slide, and I think most of you, if not many of you, were in attendance at our focus group workshop last month. So I won't spend too much time on this other than the fact that there were some clear takeaways from that. We've got a summary report that goes into much more detail here, but some of the key takeaways is we definitely identified some key corridors that should be a priority for bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. We understand that doing a better job connecting to and integrating with the transit service is really important, that there are some routes due to flooding that often force people to reroute. So we need to think about our flood hazard areas as we're planning facilities through there and have some redundancies likely built in to accommodate flooding, whether it's storm related or seasonal. We know that pavement quality is an issue, and it's an issue in every community we work in. It's particularly for bicyclists, the edge of the roadway sometimes can be the biggest challenge. The ADA accessibility is incredibly important. Lighting is also an important issue for pedestrians. That there's upcoming housing commercial development where that should be accommodated or connected to facilities. And then there's some active work on facilities such as the Pequot River Boardwalk. And we need to make sure that we're connecting to those projects. Okay.
Francisco, there's a
Yes.
typo. Your last bullet item,
Yep.
that is actually the Pequonnock River.
Pequonnock. Oh, I'm sorry.
You'll have to look that one up for
Not
spelling. I'm not going to try and
Pequonnock.
spell it.
Yeah, no, I got it. We've got a Pequonnock in Windsor, although I think it's spelled differently. Okay, thank you, Brian. All right, next slide. And then, of course, we did a tabletop mapping exercise. And so I think based upon the work we did with you last month, our existing conditions work from the various or multiple plans that have recommended greenway corridors or bike routes. We definitely have a network that we would consider to be a preferred network. So we have a good starting point, the framework of a bike and pedestrian network. And so I think our next step is to take a look at this, lay it on top of all the data we collected, and then start to identify corridors that we think have some real potential to accommodate facilities, and then figure out what type of facilities those should be. Right, next slide. As I mentioned, we have an online survey up, and we really need some help getting the word out on this. I know Mark's been pushing this out as best he can, and the rest of the department's been pushing this out on social media, on the website, on message boards. But to date, we've had a little more than 100 responses. We do have this out in Spanish language survey as well. We have not yet had participation in the Spanish language survey. We have flyers for the Spanish language survey too. So we really need to get people to participate. We don't have a hard deadline on this. We can keep it open for a while, but I think as we all understand, as we get into the middle of the summer, we start to lose people's attention. So we've got another month or so where I think we could really get people's attention. So if we can do whatever's necessary to get the word out and get some real participation, because the feedback we receive from the surveys, it's just another touch point that will help guide us in decision-making and in our planning. And so it's really valuable to us. And, you know, the binary answers to questions, the yes or no, or selecting checkboxes are valuable, but the open-ended responses can be really telling. And so we really, the more people we can hear from, the better. Okay. All right, so our next steps, we have plenty to do on the technical side in terms of taking all this existing conditions research, mapping, and then starting to take a look at individual corridors. So, but I want to focus on what we need to do in terms of engagement. So as I mentioned, we did propose doing, we are scoped to do a community-wide workshop. You know, this is something we obviously need to give the public a few weeks notice on. So we need to plan it well in advance. I think we're still in the position to, and we're definitely ready. We've done enough homework that we're ready to conduct a workshop. I think we're in a good position to get that done by the end of June, if we can make that work. Over the summer can be challenging, just getting people's attention. So this is something I could coordinate with Mark on, but I would love to get your feedback on this, your sense as to timing and, you know, what location might be most appropriate. You know, we often do these in a school cafeteria or a library meeting room or community center type room. We like to plan to accommodate up to 100 people. Very often we'll get 30, 50, 60 more commonly. So let's take a couple of minutes to talk about that. Does anyone want to chime in on your thoughts about timing of the workshop?
Can you refresh our memory as to when they all need to be done by? Like, what is the final date when you want all the workshops completed, please?
At the very least, and this would be really, this would be changing our schedule and our strategy a little bit. We could potentially do a workshop in September, middle September. And I think in terms of wrapping up the plan by the end of the year, I think it would work fine. We had initially proposed and scheduled to do the workshop before the summer. Okay. In terms of the focus group meetings, we have a lot more flexibility with those. Those are intended to be much smaller format meetings. They'll be conducted virtually. They'll be conducted with groups, small groups of constituents. And I'm a little less concerned about those. We could do those in a cluster. We could stretch them out. But I would like to start thinking about the schedule of those as well. I think more importantly, it's going to take a little time to plan a workshop, and it would be, I'd just love any thoughts that someone might have on the, whether or not June, you know, mid-June is feasible. You think it's a good time? If someone thinks mid-September would be a much better time, or maybe someone thinks that holding a workshop in July or August is not a problem at all. I just wanted to open that up to discussion.
So one of the things I was gonna ask the group was if you think it would be good to have the summer residents here, because we do have a large population that comes in for summer. So if that's the case, then you want to wait till a lot of the people are here. Or if you want just the people that are here year round, then that would, I would say, do it before summer starts. So I don't know what everybody's preference is.
It begs the question, though, would any of the summer residents attend this workshop?
So I think they should at least be, I think we should at least reach out to them because they are here for recreational purposes. And they may very well be biking in the Noang, Groton, Long Point, Mystic area. So I don't think we should ignore the influx, just like you wouldn't ignore the influx of people going in and out of Pfizer, right? So you have like a transient population, if you will, but you can't ignore them. I don't think so, but that's just one woman's opinion.
Could we do 2 workshops, like one in August, one in September, or is that out of the question?
Well, we're only scoped to do one workshop. We will also be conducting a public presentation, and that is intended for later on in the process, once we've identified our recommendations, and that's our opportunity to present what we're recommending to the public and receive some feedback on that before we finalize the plan. So we do have a separate second event planned, but it's a different purpose.
Can I go again, Brian?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
You're gonna regret that I started talking.
No, you bring up good.
So I'm just curious, and as a measure to figure out if it's worth having it when the summer residents are here, have we sent the survey link to those people that are part-time residents? So like, is there, I'm sure there is, and Andrea Frickman could probably help you with it, a way to reach those residents off season? And are we getting any response, right? So if they're interested and they're actually responding to our survey, then that might be a good indicator that you want to indeed include them in the workshop. If we've reached and we're not getting any response, that'll give you something else. If we haven't reached at all, I think we should reach out to them definitely.
I don't know if we've reached out to anybody, to be honest with you. I haven't seen
Well,
anything.
There's been some web-based outreach, right? Which only penetrates so far.
Well, I know for like the Greater Groton thing, it's posted there, that's where you
Right.
go to, but if you've subscribed to Greater Groton, you still didn't get a notification that it's a new item to go fill out.
Okay. So Patrice, you seem to know a contact that could reach out to some of the summer residents. Who is that?
Andrea Frickman.
Oh, okay.
Frickman. I thought you would know her, Mark. Don't you know her? No?
Yeah, I have her contact info, Mark.
Yeah.
Okay, she's the manager down there. Okay.
I think that's a good strategy. I would not be opposed to a summer workshop for those reasons because
Hmm,
I know
okay.
there's a visible contingent of people, at least on bicycles, who are here in the summer, and also people who are walking around town who are here for the summer.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that would certainly work with our schedule. You know, I think it's an important point. So thank you for raising it about the summer residents, and we're happy to do that if you folks think it makes sense.
In terms of getting the Groton community involved, are there ways of collaboration with things that are going out to residents anyway? So that the QR code for the survey could be a part of that, and whether it's the
Well, I think we
leisure-
missed our opportunity with.
right, or with tax bills or
Yeah.
utility bills or anything that goes out, or the Groton Times that goes in everybody's mailbox? Is there a way of reaching out to folks that way? I'm just thinking 100 surveys is just not a representative sample. So what can we do that's already being done so that we don't have to recreate the wheel to get more participation?
Well,
And-
we do have a limited direct expense budget. I believe we do. We could, you know, potentially do an ad in local paper. Generally speaking, we get much better participation after good press coverage of the project. So I'd almost prefer to go that route to get someone to pay attention to us, write a story on what we're doing, and that usually does a better job driving coverage than an ad.
That's a really good point. Mark, has anybody reached out to Kim at the day? She's usually very receptive to doing stories.
Yeah, and particularly if you could tie it to something like the
Yeah.
Gold Star Bridge thing.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. So she's already doing it. It's
Yeah.
already part, it just be incorporated into, you know, because there's gonna be another public hearing coming up on the pedestrian bridge portion of this the next week or next coming weeks. And so I'm sure she'll be there. And to have this additional information tied into her so that she puts the whole article together about the pedestrian changes on the bridge, as well as here's your opportunity to talk about it and put the survey in for the town.
And maybe letters to the editor.
Whatever, yeah.
Right.
Because it was kind of surprising at the when I went to the one, I thought they'd be doing both the pedestrian and the highway. They only did the highway part, not the pedestrian, but there was like 8 people wearing bicycle helmets at that meeting and very vocal.
Could we also have something at the summer sound waves? When does that start? When do the concerts start? When does the city farmers market start? Have we reached anybody at Pfizer? Because you've got people that go to and from Pfizer on bikes from Mystic. I see them in the morning all the time. So like just those basic calls. And I don't know if we're expected to do that or if the consultant does things like that, but should we put together a list, or Brian, is the expectation that the members of this committee will be doing that?
I think it's all of the above, actually. Yeah, I think everyone should give it their best effort to reach out to their contacts. And if the town can use its resources for outreach, that would be very helpful.
I also think just like QR codes around town, like if we could just kind of get the word out to local businesses, restaurants to post it, and just like Facebook pages and next door neighbor, I think all of those things are used much more amongst, you know, all ages.
I would say pin the post, though. I was just looking, the last post was from May 6th. It's way down in the feed, so if you can pin the post there, I don't know if you can do that on Instagram as well.
Mhm.
But if you can pin it at the top of the page, that way when people go there, they're gonna see it first.
Okay.
And then if somebody could generate, if you guys can print up the QR code like Lori
Yeah.
suggested, we could each take a stack. And
Yeah,
get them
that's-
to restaurants and stuff.
That's
And
what
you
I was
really
about
guys
to
can-
ask Francisco, if you can generate just a
Sure.
flyer. Just a
Yeah,
simple flyer.
we have some flyers,
Yeah.
so we'll just get you a PDF of that for printing. Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, why don't we move on in the interest of time? We have
Okay.
focus group meetings to cover now.
Yeah, so we have a lot of flexibility here, and I think it would be helpful to understand from you folks what type of constituencies you would like us to be meeting with. The intention of these meetings is to give us some insight into either important geographic areas or insight based upon specific contingencies or constituents, I should say. So by Groton, I could imagine doing a focus group meeting with members of that group. We could potentially do a focus group meeting with town staff, department heads, commission chairs, whoever has something to offer and is interested in having discussion about complete streets across the town. And then maybe some other groups, whether it be business groups or other geographic based groups. I think, we defer to your judgment, and then once you tell us kind of who we should be talking to and what you're interested in us focusing on, we could start to put those together and put the contact list together, and then inviting people and get those scheduled. I think we just need a little direction first to get started.
We have done some communication here in town on the composition of the groups. So I think we are ready to send that
Okay.
information to you.
Oh, great.
It may be that there's just been a lapse here in keeping up with the scope that you need from us, but we'll go back and confirm that we have these lists. We may need to add contact information to names.
I know we did have a list when we did the focus group workshop, but it wasn't clear to me that those were some of the same groups that you wanted to reach out to for these individual meetings. So assuming that's the list, then good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Yeah,
Very
there
good.
is overlap here.
Okay,
in
good.
this. So
Good.
take a look at what we've already sent and then ask us for any additional information that you may need, like contact information.
Okay.
And we'll help finish it.
Okay, very good. All right, and so that, that's the extent of what we were interested in discussing with you this afternoon. I'm happy to receive any other questions or comments you might have.
Anyone have a question?
I have no further questions.
No? Okay, I have one question, Francisco.
Sure.
And it has to do with your criteria for stressors on bicycle riders.
Yeah.
And you listed volume, speed, and crashes.
Mhm.
There's another criterion that the CONDOT uses on their interactive bike route map,
Yep.
which of course doesn't cover every state road, but it does cover some of the roads in Groton. Without looking at it now, I'm confident it covers Route 1 and Route 215, and possibly one or more others. And that is shoulder width, I believe.
Yeah.
And you should at least take a look at that and perhaps consider that as one of the stressors, because
Yep.
certain roads have little or no shoulder, and that is
Right.
certainly a deterrent that makes it less
Yeah.
comfortable to ride a bike on a road.
Yeah, I'm familiar that we actually developed that mapping for Connecticut DOT as part of the
Yes.
statewide plan that we did. And the reason we didn't include shoulder width as in this particular analysis is because that's intended to identify locations that are current stress level a user might experience on the road in the current locations. And we're thinking ahead to a dedicated bike facility. And at which point that will become either less of a factor or a non-factor unless we're talking about some sort of shared roadway. So that's the reason we left that variable out of the equation. But yeah, you're right, that's a factor as well. It really has to do with proximity. How close are you to that traffic? And we used shoulder width as a proxy for that when we did the statewide plan and mapping.
Okay, thanks.
Sure, sure.
I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much for the thorough presentation. We will we'll work on distributing the survey information. You'll send us the flyer and then we will press forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that was interesting. All right, next item on the agenda, I'd like to welcome members of Wright Pierce who are here today to bring us up to date on the Noack Main Street reconstruction project. Welcome.
It brought PowerPoint to show some images of the possible.
Mhm.
We also have boards.
No, the other way you could do it is to virtually join the meeting and I can promote you to a panelist and you can share your screen. I mean, it's being recorded, so, you know, we want attendees or, yeah, to be able to see. That's right, the one up there, Groton Wi-Fi with a capital G and a capital W. On that cream colored.
Maybe while Callie's setting up, I can just do a brief intro. The town has selected Wright Pierce to do this Main Street road reconstruction project, which is the full length of Main Street. Which is, I think it's about 1,500 feet, which includes a lot of streetscape and complete streets components to it. So we did have a public listening session where we just basically, the consultant went to the Noack Firehouse. This was back in November. And got a bunch of comments. We had about 50 people attend that, which is a pretty good turnout. And from that, Wright Pierce has developed some concept plans with some different thoughts on how to address some of the issues that we have out there. So and as part of their scope, was to present the concepts to this committee to get some feedback before we actually go out to the public with a public informational meeting, which will be probably in a month or so, once we get some feedback from you guys. So I invited them here today just to kind of show some of the concepts for dealing with the different issues that we have out there.
Have all the site investigations been completed?
Yeah, we've got the surveys been done. We've done all the borings, right, Tom? It's been completed.
Those are. Did about 29 codes to identify where there was pavement thicknesses, some preliminary idea of what the shape of the subsurface looks like. You can imagine the pavement varies greatly in different areas, and that's not fairly important. The upper portions, top of the hill, where you might expect that. So
Yeah.
Survey.
So to encourage.
Sure. But the survey's complete, and so the work that we're doing now, although was largely informed by the feedback that we received during the public listening session, your RFP, the general ideas for what you were trying to achieve is now based in real surveys. So we can look at the details of the concepts and start talking about any restrictions or, challenges that we might not now have to deliver what we hope to deliver. Great. Thanks, Kelly. So thank you. Start a little bit, but my name's Tom Hogan. I'm a senior engineer with Wright Pierce, and I have with me Callie Maggi, a landscape architect, and Larry Rozecki, project manager with the firm. We began talking about some of the project status, but we'll go over again. Greg mentioned the project area, and I handed out some of the concepts we're going to go through in more detail so that we can see. I realize it's hard to see at that small scale. There's a lot going on, but we'll talk about some of those design considerations, the concept drawings, some of the options, utilities, and then hopefully have an interactive discussion about what we're showing. And this is us. And if we remember, we engaged with Greg's department at the end of last summer, early fall, but then went directly in November or so to a public listening session that was held at the fire department. And we had great discussions. We talked about some of the observations throughout time of the people that live or use or visit the project area. We took a lot of that information and we made record of it. We also created an online opportunity to make comments about the general idea of the project. We've collected those thoughts. We've kind of put them into categories and produced them into the concepts that you have here today. As I mentioned, we've completed the land survey and geotechnical investigations. There might be an opportunity, depending on where it goes, if we might want to do a little more digging, if there's a stormwater reason to do so. So we'll keep in close contact with Greg and discuss those. And so with that, we'll maybe I'll hand it over to Callie to talk about some of the concepts that you have before you, and we can begin discussing those together.
Sure, thank you. So basically what we did is we broke this up into 3 concept drawings. The major areas of the project are Ward Avenue from Main Street to the fire station, Main Street from Terrace Ave to the dock, Pearl Street from Main Street to Potter Street. And essentially what we did is we broke these up into zones, and the 3 concepts sort of follow these different zones and different applications that can take place. It's kind of a working document at this point. We're definitely looking for some input, some thoughts and ideas. But essentially what we try to do here is look at different ways to improve the intersection by adding in additional lighting. We noticed that during the evenings, it was relatively dark in the area, especially during the time we did the listening session, around, I think it was around like 4:30, 5 o'clock, and it was pretty dark in and around those corridors. So hard to navigate, especially during those winter evenings, and then also even I'd assume during the summer. We looked at pedestrian and cyclist connectivity. As of right now, as you guys probably are aware, there's very limited pedestrian zones or cyclist zones. So some of the things that we looked at is trying to incorporate the community feedback. And one of the major concerns that the community had was to try and not make it look anything more than, so to kind of compromise with the complete street strategies and what Noank and the main street there has continued to look like over the history of the road. So that's something that we took into consideration. We also looked into the parking. We noticed that there were a lot of people parking in areas that said no parking. So to consider defining areas where people are able to park with clear signage and pavement markings, and to also add in those sort of off-street signage for parking as well. Other streetscape amenities are the signage and wayfinding of the different areas as you come into the space, especially maybe as a summer resident or a new summer resident or a visitor. It's relatively difficult to navigate and know where things are. Thankfully, it's a small corridor, so it's easy to kind of get your bearings. But adding in additional signage and wayfinding might be a little bit easier for people. Pedestrian lighting, especially for those dark evenings. And then if we want to incorporate the areas, we saw some, I guess they would be more temporary bike racks in front of the commercial areas. So considering to put in those more permanent bike racks and investing into that, adding in additional benches, so people are using the space particularly to relax and take pause, if you will, and to look at the different material options, whether it be the pavement, for permeable pavement, to help with the to offset the stormwater runoff affecting the MS4s, and then thinking about other green infrastructure strategies, such as implementing bioretention areas where applicable or where possible. And then also adding in the street tree elements to try and bring back that historical character that a lot of the residents were looking for. So concept A, the main differences between the concepts, it's very hard to see. I know it's at 60 scale when it's at a 24 by 36. So at 11 by 17, it's about 120 scale. So what we try to do is break them up into section elevations. Again, fully customizable. We can address and edit these as needed to move forward into the public comment phase. If you guys have any ideas or thoughts or things to add or take away for whatever reason, just let us know. But basically what we ended up doing, I can't really point here, but we broke these up into zones as mentioned before. So that first zone that you see was that green zone over by Ward, west of Ward Avenue, where we considered that a residential zone, basically Main Street west of Ward Ave. And we've included 4.5 foot wide curb sidewalks on either side of the street, maintaining 11-foot travel lanes, not just there, but throughout the Main Street corridor, and also Ward Ave as it exists today, even though it's not delineated. Another element that we included was 9-foot wide parking stalls, that we have them painted out in the conceptual drawings, but there's different ways to sort of conquer that, whether it be with pavement markings or even considering permeable pavement shoulders to help with stormwater infiltration.
Can I ask a question about parking?
Sure.
Does Groton have a parallel parking dimensional standard?
So, sure, you probably want to ask that of Noah.
Does Noank have?
That's what I was just
a-
gonna say.
Yes, because Groton certainly does, but.
We need to get someone from NOAC zoning in these meetings because we could do everything we want to do and then they have the final say.
Well, I assume would be talking to them perhaps separately as well. But I guess where I'm going is 9 feet seems a foot larger than necessary. I mean, we're working in Connecticut communities urban communities where 8 feet is the standard. And it doesn't seem like very much, but when you're talking about a 4.5 foot sidewalk versus a 5 foot sidewalk, it'd be nice to have that 5 foot sidewalk.
Yeah.
So
Greg, is there anything in the road and drainage standards for?
No,
for it?
typically I think we
Okay.
use almost like a 7-foot wide.
7 minimum for sure,
Okay.
for sure.
Sure, that's something that we can reduce down. So on Ward Ave, given the sort of existing corridor constraints, we actually do have 11-foot travel lanes and then the 8-foot parking stall width, but it's unpainted. It's kind of, again, it's a little hard to see in this image and I don't know how to zoom with this, so I apologize. But essentially we're not showing it marked, given that it was in that condition as of today. I wasn't sure, or we weren't sure if it was ever marked to begin with. But that said, something to consider, and we can definitely address that and revise the drawings accordingly.
But you haven't gotten any direction from Noank yet,
Not yet.
because
no.
they will have an opinion, I assume. And so rather than, well, I suppose it's a good strategy to show the preferred dimension. And then if they have a problem with it, they'll let you know.
Mhm.
They would have a controlling interest on
they're
this.
town roads, right? So.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. That's
Yeah.
They're town roads, but if there's anything off-site, then yeah, they would.
Off-site,
I mean, off the right of way.
off the right of way.
Yeah,
So
within the
we,
right of way, I think it's,
Greg owns the
it's-
right of
yeah,
way
it's not.
in knowing.
Yeah, so listen to
But-
this guy.
But signage, things like that, I can
Um,
see there being,
If it's a zoning issue, they'll,
Right.
that's where they do have the zoning
Right.
enforcement and they do control signs.
right, and I really think that they need to be aware, if we're paying these people to do work for us, they should be aware that they're gonna have to deal with the zoning eventually, so I think it would be better suited to bring them in earlier rather than
Mhm.
later.
Mhm.
Just to be sure that you're not wasting a lot of time and money.
Mhm.
And we're not wasting a lot of time and money when they're gonna look at that. I'm looking at some of the stuff you have there and I'm like, they're not gonna want that. They're not gonna want that. And I mean, I think
Yeah.
you're better off finding it out now before we get too far in this and before we waste a lot of time and energy on it.
Yeah, no, those are good points, and that's some of the feedback that we want. These are concepts and, you know, they're just ideas that I'm trying to articulate.
Yeah, it's a concept.
Get back. So,
Mhm.
we know every flip house, and we, you know, it's a minimum that everyone's comfortable with, or the best would use that to save the meeting.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
So moving into the mixed use zone, so that's Main Street east of Ward Ave to a little past Pearl Street and then Pearl Street as well. There's a bunch of commercial type businesses in the area. So what they have currently is an 8-foot wide curbed sidewalk on either side, albeit it needs a little TLC. That said, we're looking to replace those sidewalks. The preferred material as of right now, due to its cost effectiveness over a long period of time, would be concrete. Again, there's other options that are available. In this particular design, we considered permeable pavers for the parking stalls, add in a little bit more of that sort of coastal colonial element to the design. And then to delineate the travel lane so people are understanding exactly where they can move about. And again, we did do the 9-foot parking on both sides of the road, given that the room allows for that at the moment. That said, we can reduce it and consider other strategies. Unfortunately, throughout this entire corridor, as we were looking within the right of way to make sure that there's enough room for pedestrians, we did focus a little bit more on the pedestrians, knowing that they didn't have that sort of access all the way from the end of Main Street down to the docks. So having in that pedestrian corridor, so adding in those sidewalks, we thought was important. And that said, given the low traffic volumes of the area, we wanted to consider doing Charos, so using a shared travel lane with the vehicular traffic and the cyclist traffic. So along Pearl Street, we had, again, some right-of-way restrictions. That's about 26 feet wide on average. Thought to maintain 10-foot travel lanes, which again, it is very tight. And not to have a delineated line, double yellow running through it as it exists currently. To not allow parking, given that there was no real availability for parking. Given the right-of-way restrictions, and then we do have a 5-foot curb sidewalk on the west side of the street, leading from Main Street down to those local businesses. As you go from Pearl Street down to the docks, we considered that more of a residential type zone. We did want to replace some of the 8-foot wide sidewalks that are curbed on the north side of the street until Church Street. And then we did narrow it back down to 4.5-foot curbed wide sidewalks. The main restriction here isn't the right of way, it's really the topography that we're working with. That said, that's why we're utilizing the 4.5-foot wide sidewalks on both sides of the street until Cathedral Heights. And then we continue a sidewalk from Cathedral Heights down to the docks on the north side of the street and discontinue it on the south side. Again, trying to maintain that minimum 11-foot travel lane along Main Street. And we do have the 9-foot wide parking. That said, again, it's something that we can address. Concept B. So this is the similar kind of concepts here. The main difference is that we have only one sidewalk west of Ward Ave rather than two on either side of the corridor. We maintain the 11-foot travel lanes. We have the 9-foot wide parking stalls on the south side of the road. Ward Ave really doesn't change much. We wanted to maintain and retain its existing character as best as possible as you enter into this neighborhood. So we maintain the 8-foot wide parking next to the park and then the 11-foot travel lanes as well. Mixed use zone, thinking a little bit more economically and future when we start going into budgets and thinking about how much this is all going to cost. We were thinking about, instead of doing the permeable pavement, because that is an additional price tag to a construction project, to instead eliminate that and use asphalt as a traditional roadway surface. To maintain the concrete sidewalks within the commercial district, make sure they're wide enough for people to be able to use. Also add in additional benches and bike racks for people to be able to utilize the space as a pedestrian and a cyclist. And then we did, for Pearl Street, think about coming up with another way of having people sort of walk from Main Street down to that commercial district while not intending to put in a raised curb, because once you put in a raised curb, you got to think about drainage again. We are going to be thinking about drainage throughout, but trying to maintain an existing drainage system as it is today with minor improvements. So instead we did a pedestrian lane, so it would be flush with the roadway pavement. For, again, concept B, residential zones, so east of Pearl Street on Main Street. Basically what we're doing here is we have 4.5-foot wide sidewalks on both sides of the street until Cathedral Heights. We have curb sidewalks on the north side to the dock. We have the 11-foot travel lanes, 9-foot parking on the north side of Cathedral Heights. And then instead of, or in lieu of having any sort of needing to realign the roadway, we decided to instead allow there to be the parking that people are currently doing on the south side, east of Cathedral Heights to West River. About 3 stalls can be retained there. Concept C, the thought process here is to have a continuous walkway all the way from the west side of Main Street down to the docks. This does require a roadway realignment. It does encroach into people's lawns a little bit more. There's going to be some retaining walls that are required. It's a little bit more of an invasive process, but since it's a full road reconstruction, this would be the time to do it and to really look into how exactly this corridor will look as a complete street, again, with those bicycle charros.
That being, however, it seems to us that still lies within the town right away.
Correct. Everything is within the town right away. Yep. It's just, again, within the town right away, there's significant changes in topography. There's some retaining walls with some driveway aprons. So that required us to encroach within the roadway to meet these sort of design criteria, which is where you see us utilize the 4.5-foot wide curb sidewalks for the most part of the design, rather than the 5-foot. That said, we do know that for there is a transition period that would need to take place in order for there to be for ADA compliance, where you would go from a 4.5, widen it to a 5x5 every 250 feet or so. That said, we can accommodate within certain areas and try to mitigate the amount of impact it will have on the overall topography and reduce the amount of retaining walls that would be needed. So again, very similar to the other concepts. I believe concept B, very similar layout here for these corridors within the mixed use zone. And then that difference is that we, instead of having the parking on the south side, we encroached into the sidewalk we encroached into the roadway to include a sidewalk on that south side, but still having that continued sidewalk on the north side straight through Main Street. Streetscape amenities to consider, and we would like the town and the neighborhood village input on what they would like to see within this corridor, whether they want to do sidewalk curb decals to add in that sort of character that they were looking for, or to create different zones and materials that just make it feel a little bit more quaint and inviting for people to use, to think about the atmosphere, think about the scale. And that's really where those material options come into play. All of the materials that we would look at and consider are fully ADA and ProReg compliant, as long as the design and the construction meets those criteria. Intersections and crosswalks, the things that we want them to consider is, you'll see that we kind of used a little bit of a salmon color. That, again, we're not married to that idea. It's just for graphical purposes. So to consider the different types of crosswalk materials, whether or not they want to do the inlays, or they want to use pavers, or they want to go with the traditional paint, or to come up with community projects to sort of express the neighborhood's artistic views, if that's something they so desire. Other elements that we want them to consider is, I know that in a lot of cases, we're widening the roadway in some areas, and that is going to impact the overall impervious surface area. That said, we need to look at the stormwater and how that's going to impact it. So we want to consider green infrastructure practices such as permeable pavers, thinking about utilizing those in the parking stalls, and then also considering bioretention filters, specifically at the west end of of Main Street, west of Ward Ave. There is an opportunity to be able to utilize that space as a bioretention area for stormwater infiltration. Again, things that we want the neighborhood to consider is to come up with their own sort of brand, and something to think about is how they go about. One way of going about doing that is to include signage and wayfinding within the corridor. One of the issues that they have that you can obviously see is that people come in, they park in areas that you're not supposed to park. So clearly define spaces for parking, help them understand where parking is available behind the shops and different commercial areas. Other options to consider are there was a support for benches and bike racks within the corridor. And again, as I mentioned, they were looking to include the trees that were originally removed. I believe it was the Dutch elm disease that wiped out the trees that were lining the roadway on Main Street, and to bring back something that could recreate that historical look is something that the community was looking for. There was very high support for street lighting, albeit there's going to be some options. So not going to go into the full details, but there is a lot of options available, and that can really help the neighborhood create that sense of identity. That said, picking out their pole base and standardizing that, or if the town would like to utilize their own and use that throughout the corridor, that's also an option. The different types of light fixtures that are available out there. I mean, there's so many within the catalogs. Or again, if the town has their own to utilize that within the corridor, that's something that can be discussed during the community input. The type of arms that essentially is where you mount the light fixtures. The different accessories, whether it be for flagpoles or for baskets or for wreaths, for celebrations and things of that nature. And then the last thing we wanted them to consider, and there was significant feedback on essentially taking the above ground utilities and trying to bring them underground to bring back that historic view shed that ran throughout that Main Street area. It's something that we have looked in, but I don't want to speak to it too much because I only understand it literally at the surface level. So I'll either give it to Tom or Larry to discuss.
No, we recognize the comment. We appreciate it and we'll continue to discuss it. And that's kind of where we are with it. There's a lot of, there are complications with it. I like the idea, but Greg and I are going to continue to investigate that, I would say. The only other item, and thank you, Callie, it was a great presentation. I appreciate it. You talked quickly about stormwater and green infrastructure, LID. We talked about biofiltration. We don't have an official mechanism or a BMP cited right now. Part of what, and the idea is to have this on generally a small scale so that we can, find the appropriate location if it exists, take advantage of that for the purposes of responsible stormwater management. And we think it makes sense based on our preliminary probes, something maybe at the west end where the town we observed had done some tidying up of the stormwater surface water management systems. I think that's worth continuing that discussions and we'll report to you back on how that ends up. Part of it's going to depend on where your curb lines are, where your catch basins are. And, so whatever we show for stormwater management right now is kind of a placeholder until we, know what the configuration of the roadway system is. But those are our initial ideas. We want to improve existing conditions to the maximum extent that makes sense for this site. So, I don't know if there's anything else on utilities. We're kind of at the surface. The other utility considerations at this point in time, we'll continue to discuss those, but we've really been focusing on what we heard from the public listening session, what we've learned from our subsurface investigations, our survey, our review of existing conditions. And we have these concepts that I'm glad for this opportunity to talk to you about. And, even in this short amount of time, we've gained some valuable feedback. And I know Greg is working on scheduling a next session with NOANC. I think Greg is, or public hearing to discuss the concepts a little bit farther after this feedback as well. So I don't know if there's any questions and or comments.
I think we have questions and feedback, but what I want to do is put that on hold for a few minutes because Greg has to leave at 5 and we want to hear about the current and ongoing town projects that we have on the list. And Greg, I just have a question to start it off. Did the town submit an application for a road safety audit on Route 1?
Not yet. It has to go through the traffic authority.
Okay.
And they meet in June, so I'll have everything prepared for them for that meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. I'll just run through briefly the town projects that Brian had spoke about. Route 215 or Groton Long Point Road, a number of years ago, I believe it was the state repaved and they didn't reestablish the bike lane symbols. And so we actually went out there this week and put those back from Brook Street down to Esker Point Beach. We also restriped the town portion of Groton Long Point Road, which goes from Elm Street to Groton Long Point. So that's new center line and shoulder striping. And then we will be putting up bike lane signage. So it'll be a much more robust signage program out there on Groton Long Point Road. And I know later Brian will be talking about the bridge replacement project, which is also has some bike lane components to it. The bike route project from Depot Road to Thomas Road. I know Mark's kind of the lead on this one, but we did put out the request for qualifications for consultants. I believe those are actually due today, weren't they, Mark?
Yes, and as
Yeah.
of yesterday, there were no letters of interest.
Oh, okay.
So, and I haven't talked to the purchasing agent today because they were due it by 2:30 today, but.
Okay, usually they'll come in like the last day,
Oh,
so
okay. All right.
don't worry if they,
Okay. Yeah.
You probably got some
I was
today.
discouraged when I
Yeah.
heard what?
so that project, and that's to hire the consultant to do the design work for that project, which we got the grant for. Industrial Drive repavement, this road, was pretty, rated pretty poorly as far as the pavement goes. I put in the capital improvement, we have a number of roads to repave and I included this one. The council passed it. The RTM Public Works Committee did cut Industrial Drive because, it's quite frankly not really any houses on it, but it is part of the bike route from Knoxville to Depot Road, which will hopefully at some point include the pump track at the end of Depot Road. So I do go to the full RTM on Monday, so we'll try to get that restored so that we can repave that road.
And there were some letters written to the RTM.
Yeah.
I think Brian wrote one. Tom, I think, made some comments, and there might have been one or two.
There was a
others,
couple
so,
other, yes, support.
Yeah, exactly.
Marsh Road, Noack, the town will be repaving that starting June 3rd. That's the full length of Marsh Road. That road is in really tough shape. So we're gonna be doing that June. It'll probably be done by July. And I know, Mark, you have the tour to Noack, so they'll be running on some gravel road for a portion of that race.
Okay, well, that's better for the knees.
Yes. And then the last one I had is the traffic signal at Pequannock Road and Village Lane, where Pequot Village Housing is. There's an existing light there that's in really bad shape. It's been, I think, there for probably 25, 30 years. We did get funding for that to replace it, and we're getting that ready to go out to bid. And that includes all new ADA ramps and pedestrian signals for the four-way intersections and apartment complex also at that intersection. That's it.
Does Marsh Road suffer from poor subsurface conditions?
It suffers from flooding right now. There's at King High Tides, there's a section of road that does flood, but we are planning to raise that about a foot or so to alleviate that problem. We actually got that comment from another number of residents. We did put some extra drainage in, and when we do these roads, we go in and we reclaim it. So we take the existing pavement and grind it into the gravel, and that makes a really stable base. And then we'll put down, 5 inches of asphalt on this road, because, there's a lot of heavy truck traffic with the boats. The Spices Marina hauls their boats up and down this road, so we want to make sure we have a good stable base and a good road surface.
Great, thank you.
Can I just ask, what was the rationale for the cut of the Industrial Drive repavement? What was the reason why they gave?
Just because not a lot of residents live on that road. That was basically it. It didn't benefit a lot of residents. But my argument was that it's part, half of it is part of a bike route. And then, and the other half is in such bad condition. I mean, the Amtrak facility does use that as their driveway, driving their trucks and all the, employees drive in and out of there. And I don't know if you've been down there, but it's in really rough shape.
My comments, just for, for disclosure here, I did write a letter in saying that my concern was more that the cut was to the overall paving budget. And if the RTM has concerns about a specific road that's in there, they shouldn't be cutting the budget. They should just be asking you to reprioritize what roads you're doing. But as in my view, it's much more critical to keep the budget number up, because this is, rather than bonding, we're doing this on a year-to-year basis. So I agree that the road's in rough shape, and maybe it just needs, it could be put into a different kind of category rather than being as with everything else.
Okay, thank you for that good discussion. I think while Greg's still here for just a few more minutes, let's cover a couple of issues that he can contribute to. And first up is item for number 3, Route 215 replacement of the bridge, which is the Amtrak bridge and bike lanes. And really that's overlapping with the section that the town just freshened up, for lack of a better term, for bike lanes, right? So that'll be redone by DOT
In a few years, yeah. when
in
they
a few
replace
years.
That bridge.
So that project was just like revealed to the public on Monday night at a public information meeting, and it is the Amtrak bridge. So it's where 215 crosses over Amtrak on its way down to Esker Point. So that bridge is being replaced, and the replacement bridge will be, I believe, 4 feet higher. So the approach to the road to the bridge will be raised. So the gradient down to Esker Point will be steeper. But the benefits to the community are that there will be new sidewalks on the west side of the road. So where there's currently just a dirt path down to Esker Point will be a urban sidewalk. And the state decided that they could expand the scope of the project to include buffered bike lanes from Fitch High School to Esker Point. So this is one of the first examples of the state sacrificing a breakdown lane, which is how they like to describe those shoulders, for bike lanes, which is really good news. And a buffered bike lane just means that it's a 5-foot wide lane against the outer edge of the roadway, and then there's a painted strip of whatever is left over. That's like, it's like angled lines between the two parallel white lines that gives the cyclist more of a buffer from the roadway. And so it should be at least 18 inches or 2 feet of separation. So that was really good news that the state DOT, which historically has resisted suggestions that shoulders be formally designated as bike lanes, is now looking at shoulders and saying, yeah, we might be able to start doing this. So that's really good news. Last item before we go back to Noank, thank you for your patience, is there are no bike racks here at the town hall annex. And I don't believe there are any at town hall. And I think it would be a really easy lift for the town to take care of this. And I don't know if we need to find a grant to cover it. Like Groton's been really successful getting grants for the pump track. Maybe we can, but I think that's something that we really should think about doing post haste, because it's not a good reflection. And I did ride here and ended up walking on one of your signs over by the EV charger. That wasn't great. So
I read the front door.
You just
on the gutter.
okay. Yeah.
Trying
So,
to
I
make
mean,
a point. It's by the door right there.
okay. Anyway, so that was all I had to say about that. It was just to bring that to your attention.
Okay, I will work with Mr. Barry over there and figure out what kind of bike racks we should have, see what we can do about getting those.
Yeah, and they could just be simple, inverted U-shaped racks that are bolted to the concrete, and those work great. So, but I also want to recognize Parks and Recreation for the new bike racks that are at the Quantic Plains Park that are
Oh, those are cool.
really, they look cool.
Thank you. Not everybody shares that. opinion. There's always some trolls and yes.
I like them a lot.
Yeah, I like them a lot. I haven't seen a bicycle.
And you can see them from
walk to
far
one
away.
yet, but I'm sure they're starting to
Mine
be
was
used.
gonna stage bikes there, just.
Stage them, okay. Well, Bike Groton has some bikes.
Perfect.
They're in a room at the community center.
On the subject of buffered bike lanes, could I just suggest that we continue that trend? I would love to always see buffered bike lanes and always much more obvious bike
Yeah.
lanes in
Well-
any bike lane that we put in. I think it's frustrating just to see a picture of a bike painted on it. I wouldn't
Right.
consider that a.
Well,
bike
it always boils down to how much space there is to work with.
lane. Yes,
Yeah.
but even just a different color.
It's kind of ironic. We had proposed exactly what the state's doing with the buffer, like a 2-foot parallel white lines with a diagonal. Because I've seen those and DOT said no. they weren't gonna allow us to do that. This was like a year ago. And I said, I couldn't figure out why. And now all of a sudden, at the meeting the other night, they showed that exact picture. This is what they're putting in. I said, okay.
They're gonna lower the speed limit on 215?
I doubt it.
No, the traffic authorities tried a couple times to get that done and DOT will not budge on that.
I would also love to throw in some physical barriers, but I think that feels like a stretch maybe at the moment.
Not gonna happen.
Just some posts. I would just.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. So now we can, I know Greg has to
I gotta
go.
run.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Greg.
Yep.
For what you're.
You guys will
you're doing.
catch up.
Yeah. Right here's. Stuff you run question. Jess Richard was with us and she's a grant specialist. That's her other job. I'm gonna ask her tomorrow. For the work. And she knows where to ask for.
Right. Well, there is one that that's out there now. That's a Connecticut Department of Transportation micro grant. And Bike Groton has received one in the first round for the pump track that's been mentioned a couple of times tonight. And so the second round is about to open. I think the fiscal year starts the second round. And so it's a $5,000 maximum and the town could easily, and there's a lot of money just waiting for applicants because only part of it, like a third of their budget was granted in this first round. So and they granted every application, I think, that came in. So for $5,000, the town could do some nice bike racks.
Permanent ones, because wasn't there, I thought I heard some discussion about there
Oh.
couldn't be permanent structures. It could.
You may be right. So that may not be the best fit for that program, but
It was
it's
education, like
it's a small lift.
cones to set up. bike
Yeah,
routes and-
you're right.
Right?
Okay, well, we'll find another. Okay. Okay. So I'll start off with my question that has to do with, have you characterized the three options based on any like guiding principle? Like is A the most ambitious, B, C, or most expensive? Or is there any kind of classification of these that we can use to frame our review of it? Or is it just simply a little this and a little that, looking at different opportunities in different places?
As of right now, it is essentially sort of tweaking the different areas into understanding whether or not we can include a sidewalk or not include a sidewalk. And if we still include a sidewalk, what does that do with regards to limiting the amount of retaining walls that would be necessary to make room? So there has been no cost analysis as of this point. Just trying to go through the sort of thought process with them, but that is something to consider, is to go through that route. And we could go where it's like most advantageous or like most economic versus like big picture, like let's just make this that sort of thing. But a lot of the comments that we received from the community is that they wanted minimal changes done within this corridor, very minimal. Some of them actually wanted to go back to the dirt roadway that they originally had, and no sidewalks, and it's, so we're trying to come up with
Sure.
some compromise and not.
I love it, Erica.
Is option A, that has the most. You say
C has.
C has the most. And then, you know, it's kind of added on and subtracted, so that there isn't like top of the line minus 20% minus that. Because some of the options don't go with each other.
Gotcha.
Well, we could come up with a way to describe it a little more clearly, like why that is.
I think that would be helpful to give each option maybe a little bit of its own personality, just so that when we look at, and when the community looks at this, they can, I think more effectively imagine what each would be like, rather than having it more like just a dispersal of opportunities. If there's some kind of a theme attached to each concept, I think that would help
Even just like a couple of
The
big picture
understanding.
ideas
Yeah.
for each, because I did find it hard to pick
Yeah.
apart the differences.
It's virtually impossible to tell the difference between A, B, and C, just looking at this as a, and I've looked at a lot of these things over, but this one, it was really difficult to pull out. It's like looking for the changes and the 5 changes between the 2 pictures and, there's no light pole here, but there is over here and that type of stuff. It's kind of micromanaging. But one thing, that one trend was, where the sidewalks are going to be. So have you pulled any data as far as, I know that there's trail things that monitor cell phone usages to tell you where you are, to see where people are walking today, because we don't have a lot of sidewalks down there. And you almost can get it down to what side of the street they're on and pull that data up would be helpful to kind of say, here's where people are going right now. This is where, where we would be recommending that you put the sidewalks to help the people out using the way that they're, and still keeping where the traffic flows are of people as well as the cars. I just toss that out as an information. Like,
Yeah, one of the comments that we received is that they actually didn't want sidewalks at all.
Mhm.
That only the summer residents or visitors were really kind of thinking about the idea of sidewalks. That said, we understand that delineating the space between vehicularies and pedestrians is important, which is why we went with the sidewalk
Right.
orientations with the grid. But we can take a look at that, a little bit more in detail and see if we can dig up some data.
I don't live down there, so it's hard for me to know what the real, from a perspective, but it seems like that data is available in today's environment, because all the people down there have cell phones. There's no doubt about that.
Right, it's available for sale.
Yeah, but
It's available for sale. Now,
Be a new one for my cell phone. That's interesting concept.
yeah, but I think this would be an ideal situation where it'd be helpful trying to sell which, as far as between A, B, and C, this is the sidewalk, most sidewalk or the recommended sidewalk one. This is the recommended for illumination for alternative, and this is the, whatever for street alignments, or for MS4 type of stuff, for your themes I'm trying to, that Brian mentioned here.
Mhm, mhm.
Is take a look at what the options are, what it would look like.
Now, now I don't live in the village, but I do live on the hill above the village. So I walk, my wife and our dogs walk through Noack a lot. And so an observation here is that 90% of the Noack village streets do not have sidewalks, and everyone walks in the street. And it's actually a form of traffic calming down there, because there are so many people walking the street that to drive through there, it means you really have to slow down and watch out for people walking, which is a good thing. So I would look at it from the point of view of where are people like more concentrated and lingering on the sides of the street, and that is around Ward and Main Street at the park and in front of Carson's and all the way down to the dock. I think those are heavy pedestrian corridors, and I don't know if there's anywhere else that is justified to have a raised sidewalk. Pearl Street is so narrow, like you've observed, that if there's room for just a strip, maybe, but I don't even know if that's even necessary, because everybody just walks down Pearl Street
Mhm.
on either side, and it's really a very effective traffic calming to have people out in a slow speed street like this. Creates a slow street. So, and that would save resources for, special areas like the west side of Main Street between Ward and the Pearl Street intersection. I think if you could really concentrate the richer improvements where it's very justifiable, which is along the frontage to the park, I think that will be more acceptable to the neighborhood than saying we want to put sidewalks, into further extended areas.
Actually wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. May I, please?
Yeah, sure, of course.
I would say frame an option as the option that is most sensitive to the historical character of the village, as well as most sensitive to the issues that will be happening with flooding and rainwater. So your permeable pavers your retention areas. I think those coupled with the historical character would make a very nice fit. And that would probably go really well. I would say, don't bother with the signs. I don't think
With one
people,
exception,
people want signs, like they give people wrong directions to get to places because,
you need to have a sign that
says
points people
Abbott's.
to Abbott's.
Well, but it's there and that's part of the character, right? It's a little.
Abbott's Clam
But
Shack.
that's not a permanent thing. That's a temporary thing that they put up and it's nice character. It's fitting with the village, right?
Yeah,
Like, I
right,
don't
right.
think that they're gonna want
more
like
'cause
your
they wanna send people
streetscape
just there.
images, you know, and like when you were talking about the salmon, the indented paver, that's not like the feel that I get
Yeah,
from
so,
having
right,
lived here.
right.
So I think one of your options should be historically sensitive along with the sustainable, resilient kind of aspect of it, because you have a lot of people down there that are of that mindset.
Yeah, I wouldn't show in a public forum any of those more stylistic streetscape approaches, because that could turn people off that live there to the point where they just become opposed to the
Anything.
project. Yeah. So, you know, any artistic crosswalks, I take those out. I would
The
I would-
stamped concrete.
take that out.
Mhm.
I mean, I think the Noank was a working fishing village, and many of the residents that still live there still have that mindset, which is a good thing. You know, that's the tradition of that community, and it's slowly eroding. But to pay homage to it, I think is the right thing to do, at least in one of your concepts, if not maybe a underriding current through them all. I think that would help sell the approach, is if you clearly respect kind of that working class landscape, streetscape. I mean, it's just, there's nothing fancy about any of Noank except for some of the historic architecture, and that's just not the same as a streetscape.
Yeah, I'm looking at Abbott's sign right here. If you go to Google Earth, you know, and Google Maps and just go and figure out what's going on there, that you want to maintain that look. We're trying to improve the street.
I really appreciate this feedback. The geometry is gonna change on our homes, you know, surface treatments.
Yeah.
And that's good because we feel good about the geometry that we've got, that we can get people and vehicles from A to B. That doesn't have to be conflicts. We don't have to overdo it. And then we can talk about the surface treatments, but this is, you know, we're gonna have this option. So this is.
I do think for some perspective, I do think the signage for Abbott's is to keep the tourists just on their way to Abbott's. and nothing
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Because I think that times when I have felt unsafe, it's sometimes people that aren't familiar with the area, they don't know where they're going, they got stuck on the street, they don't know what street they're on. So I think that having something is good for Abbott's, because a lot of times that's where they're going, they just don't know how to get
Yeah,
there.
it is. Yeah, it's a high visibility area. It's, you know, advertised by the governor and everybody else, but is where you want to go. But
Yeah, but you don't want someone who doesn't know the neighborhood being driving around.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're looking at anything except what's in.
it's almost like you'd want an option D, it include, well, kind of like you go to Boston, you follow the Freedom Trail, you just kind of stay on the red line and get to Abbott's. I'd almost, you know.
Well, I would
I don't
argue
think-
that
yeah.
wayfinding is valuable there, if it's really just kind of low key and not too stylistic. But there are marinas that you can access. Well, there's marinas surrounding the peninsula, but telling people how to get to the marinas, like right at the bridge or at the railroad bridge, might be valuable. Telling people that the restaurant or Abbott's, you could put it on the sign, is to the right, could be valuable. And so maybe there's a couple of places where a wayfinding sign would be desirable and the residents would appreciate that, so that we don't have that problem of people just aimlessly driving around. And and I heard this at the open house. A lot of local residents saying, we need more parking, we need more parking. You should put a parking lot down at the dock. You should pave more. And I'm just concerned that that is a misdirected point of view. And that it represents, the short summer season when tourists are coming through there, but not the year-round condition. And I'd hate for Noank to have more impervious pavement just because we're trying to accommodate the crowds. I just don't think that's wise.
That was my other question that I had. We talked about MS4 at the west end of Main Street. That's like going right into the Amtrak. Where would, I didn't see where this town owns
It's
any
at the
property.
very end that they point out.
It's a little, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't have the design.
Okay.
Right now, I'm thinking,
Okay.
what are the limits of the pavement? What do I have left over?
Okay.
And the reason I also gravitate to that area is because it's a little softer soil wise. There is a little property, not a lot. I'm not talking about a big retention basin.
Okay.
Nothing like that. Just thinking like the Ryan well, something that can provide some soil filtration. Soil, maybe a treatment unit for sediment. Small scale, maybe 2 areas like that, but nothing major, nothing intended to create a maintenance burden. Right now, I think one of the drainage discharges.
You have to go. Hang on 1 second, Tom. I'm sorry. Before you go, Patrice, on the way out the door, I just want to pay tribute to a resident of Noank who has had a lot to say about this project that you're working on, but who suddenly passed away recently, and that is Zell Stever, who had a note card, a 3x5 note card, just jammed full of ideas at the open house. And I remember he was letting you guys have it. It's just a great loss for the community and for Connecticut, because he was a dynamo. He really was a great person. Yeah. And perhaps there's a way we could pay tribute to him in this project.
Well, it's in front of his old house. So.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
We're not going to even plant. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Some of his ideas were very wacky, and I was just like, yeah, no, I mean, he lived right on Main Street. Something.
I don't like the street lighting.
A good old Zell.
I remember you were at the public meeting last time.
For sure. If I'm in town.
And if we could even share this concept to make sure I'm hearing what you're saying.
Now, you haven't scheduled that, right? Is it imminent, or is? Okay. Half of it.
Greg's in charge.
Yeah.
Could I throw out one other idea? I don't know if people would hate this or not. Maybe you have more of an idea, but a pedestrian bridge over the train tracks at the west end of Main Street. I don't know if people would be super opposed to that, but kind of like a borough vibe. I feel like that would be awesome, but I don't know if.
I nominate you to be our representative to go talk to Amtrak.
Yeah.
I would love to. Just like a quaint little cool pedestrian bridge, like the one that connects the borough to kind of like over by the Velvet Mill. Like I love, that feels like a quaint little villagey hometown vibe instead of like a touristy destination. And I think Noank, that's the main thing for Noank. It feels like a little village that's ours, and it's quaint and awesome for the people that live there.
Cool idea. I think it's the first time I've heard that idea.
Maybe you could incorporate it into the, the drainage situation.
Yeah, no, I mean, for my entire career, I've talked with many people about what great things we wish we could do with railroads and crossings. And I think the reality is that The roadway that was abandoned there at the bottom of Main Street was then exchanged for a bridge. And that is the end of any right of crossing over Amtrak, and it, in perpetuity, there will never be another crossing. So that's the, do you agree? When it comes to Amtrak? Yeah.
But I don't know, probably not.
Like, you're letting me down easy. He's like, maybe later.
I don't think so. I don't think, so. All right, well, let's adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone. I guess I need a motion to adjourn.
I will be adjourned.
I'll second.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.